We are very simpatico, it appears here, Michael. We are 4 for 4 the same in our division picks. I don't know if that's a good thing or a dangerous thing, but here, why don't you go?
You go first.
Oh, well, I mean, they're the same,
first.
Michael.
I went first the last time.
They're the same, but let's can go through it.
Yeah. I mean, how could you? I think Pritch was right. Like, I don't trust that. I think Dallas overachieved last year. I don't think they underachieved. And I think Philly's roster is really good. And I'm not saying Philly's going to win everything, but I just have a hard time believing Washington, the Giants. I mean, those are teams that are just not ready to compete with the Eagles or the Cowboys. Mm-hmm. The Cowboys, when you don't win on the road, that tells me your offensive line isn't good enough. No. And so I just couldn't go there with two rookies potentially starting in the offensive line for the Cowboys.
Yeah, that's a division of the haves and have-nots, absolutely. And the Eagles should have won the division last year, but obviously we know how things fell apart at the back end of the season. Cowboys win. There's not been a repeat division champ in the NFC East since 2004. And, looking at the guide and the selections here, it seems like we're all pretty much in that thought process, which is why Philadelphia has taken so much money and gotten down to the price that they're at even money. 18 of our 21 experts, hosts that have put their opinions in here were on Philly, just 3 on Dallas. The NFC West, minus 195 the price. I'm not going to the counter rushing to bet the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC West, but I do think that they're going to win again. I think that for as high as I am on the Rams for getting better this season and taking another step from what ultimately ended up being like a year we thought was going to be a rebuild year, they win double digits and make the playoffs last year. Seattle is a team I know you've talked a lot about, and we did today on the show as well, that's improving. And with Mike McDonald, that defense should be at least a good chunk better than we saw last year just from his guidance and leadership alone. But I don't think that they're there in the division just yet. So for me, it's San Francisco. That's the only real option in the NFC West, in my opinion. As according to the guide as well, that's pretty much across the board how everyone feels. And I landed on Detroit and the Saints in the NFC North and NFC South. And you did as well, obviously, but I'm curious your opinion on this for the Saints specifically, because as Mike Pritchard said, he feels like that division, even still with the Falcons as an odds-on favorite, is just throwing a dart at a dartboard in this division. What made you settle on New Orleans?
Well, I settled there because I think defensively they're the best team. I think they proved it with 4 out of 5 wins. They go into Tampa at the end of the year last year and won that game. I think Dennis Allen is a better defensive coordinator than he is a head coach. I admit that, even though he's still the head coach of the Saints. I just think, to me, they'll have a better opportunity. And I think, look, their offensive line has to be better than it was last year. And Carr, who I call the Ricky Fowler of the NFL, when it doesn't matter, he plays great. When it matters, it's not so good. And that always makes me nervous. But the reality here is, who is good in the South? Like, that's why I asked Pritch, throw a dart up against that board, because I don't know who's good. And so I was going to go with the defensive team, and I'm going to go with the, now I think they got to get Kamara under contract and get that situation handled. But I do think their offensive line improving, and they should have enough weapons on offense to be successful.
No love for the Bucs in the division, it appears, who have won 3 straight division titles, including last year, their first season without Tom Brady. Baker Mayfield led them to not only a division win, but a playoff win against the Philadelphia Eagles here. 5 people, including the 2 of us, were on New Orleans. Everybody else on the Falcons, with the exception of Wes Reynolds, who picked the Panthers, but nobody on the Bucs to win the division yet again. And the NFC North, I think, is interesting, too. I really I agree with everything that we were talking about earlier in the show, with that's a division where there are options, and that Green Bay is certainly a team capable of being on the rise. A lot of people like Chicago and believe that Caleb Williams can be a big piece of turning that organization around with the weapons that they have around him on offense and a defense that seemed to take a big step forward at the end of last season. But Detroit, for me, is still the team to beat, coming off of what was their first division title since 1993 last year. I am such a believer in everything that Dan Campbell has done to turn that franchise around. Jared Goff and that offense should be live again to put a ton of points up on the board. And if their defense improves a little bit, like they worked on getting pieces in that secondary, I think that they're going to be very, very competitive and tough to overcome in the division.
Yeah, I was back and forth. Do I go Green Bay or the Lions? And I felt exactly like you felt. I felt like the battle tested. You have to win a home game. You just don't go from a playoff team, from a first-time playoff team to the Super Bowl. I think it's really challenging. So I think you need those residuals to build up as you go through it. And I kind of felt like the Lions game against the 49ers gave them that. And so for me, I went Lions over Packers. I went back and forth. I think the Bears are going to be way too young to compete there, so I didn't give them. In Minnesota, I just don't know what to expect offensively from Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy, depending on who they go with in their offense. But I do like O'Connell, and I think they'll be better. But I went Lions with you there too. To me, it was a toss-up in the South, NFC South. I just felt like, to me, nobody's going to think it's the Saints, so I went with them because I think they do have a good defense, and I do think that if Carr plays within himself, they have a chance.
Yeah, no doubt about it. To wrap up those thoughts on the NFC North, just from a historical standpoint for those interested, the Lions won last year for the first time since 1993. Minnesota won in 22. Green Bay, prior to that, won 3 straight and 8 of 11 before missing out on the division crown each of the last 2 years. Obviously, all of those seasons with Aaron Rodgers. Can Jordan Love help this Green Bay team to take that next step? Lions plus 150, the Packers plus 210, and the Bears plus 265 in the division. Not a soul picked Chicago in our betting guide, despite those odds, which are pretty short there at the top.